So, you fancy getting into landscape photography, but you don't know where to start. You're not sure about cameras, locations, techniques, or the jargon. You just know you'd like to start photographing the natural world and maybe stick a few prints on the wall in the back bedroom. So, if you fancy moving on from snapshots and taking your landscape photography a bit more seriously, then here's how to get started. Before we get into the nitty gritty, here's the number one thing to bear in mind when taking up landscape photography as a hobby. You need to start transitioning your thinking away from the mindset of the casual snapper and into a creative and, dare I say it, artistic mindset. I realise that sounds a bit pretentious when said out loud, but it's true. You need to stop simply reacting to stuff and start thinking about your photographs. It's this thought process that makes the difference between a snap and a photograph. Alright, let's start this absolute beginner's guide by talking about cameras. One thing that people stress about more than is healthy prior to getting into landscape photography is the camera they should buy. There are so many brands and so many different models of camera within those brands and so much conflicting advice that they end up going around in circles. So let me state one thing quite clearly. It's actually really hard to buy a bad digital camera these days. There are minor differences in quality, sure, but any camera you find in a store these days will be more than capable of taking great landscape photographs. So here's my advice. Go into a camera store and try holding the cameras. The way a camera feels in the hand is much more important than some ephemeral technical specification such as its fringing at small apertures. Hold the camera, take some test shots, analyse how easy it is to change the settings. How about that menu system? Is it intuitive? Can you find your way around it easily? If you're prepared to invest in a camera, then don't stress about the brands, just buy one that is at the right price point for you. If you just want to dip your toes in the waters of landscape photography and don't want to invest in a proper camera, then just use your smartphone. You can learn about composition and other techniques with any camera, whether it's on a smartphone or it's a full camera. If you're buying a DSLR or mirrorless camera with interchangeable lenses, then ideally you want a couple of lenses to begin with, one wide and one long. If you can only afford one lens, then don't stress about it. Being forced to use that one lens is actually a great discipline and will help you get creative with your shots as you're forced to improvise. The millimeter specifications for lenses refer to its focal length. Smaller focal numbers such as 10mm, 12mm or 16mm are considered wide angle. Focal ranges such as 50mm or 85mm are medium and often used to photograph closer subjects, macro shots or for portrait work. Focal ranges such as 270mm, 400mm or 600mm apply to zoom or telephoto lenses. If you buy a camera and lens package, then the lens that comes with the camera is referred to as a kit lens. Most of these kit lenses are 18 to 55mm, which means you can use them for both wider and closer photographs. Kit lenses are sometimes looked down upon by snobby photographers, but don't stress about that. Kit lenses are always excellent and a terrific starting point for any photographer. Don't go spending a load of money on lots of different lenses until you work out what sort of landscape shots you like taking. You may decide you like to shoot really wide, expansive shots and therefore a super wide angle lens is a great option. You may prefer a traditional mid-range focal length and a 50mm prime lens or an 85mm prime is a great option. You might like zooming in on the detail, in which case obviously a good telephoto macro lens is great. But the point is that you won't know which lens to buy until you start experimenting. Before committing to any lens purchase, I always suggest that people rent one first, just to make sure it's what they want. Rental is cheap and a welcome reality check before what is often an expensive purchase. Typically speaking, the lenses produced by the same manufacturer as your camera will work best with your camera, but third-party lenses from brands such as Tokina, Sigma and Zeiss are great options too. If you can invest money in a lens, then remember that you can carry on using it for many years as you upgrade your cameras. There are no hard and fast rules as to which lens to use in any given situation, and my advice is to just experiment extensively. This is far and away the best way of learning. The single most important accessory for landscape photographers is a tripod. Tripods range in price from $50 at the budget end all the way up to thousands of dollars at the professional end. If you can afford a carbon fiber tripod rather than a more traditional aluminium one, then you should get it because they're much lighter. As with many areas of photography, there is a lot of snobbery surrounding various brands, but don't spend money on those high-end tripods when you're starting out. You can get great Chinese-made tripods on Amazon that are often as good as the high-end brands, but a fraction of the price. Tripods are important to landscape photographers because it's crucial to minimize shaking when taking a photograph. Shaking, even tiny little shakes, can adversely affect a photograph, so use a tripod whenever you can. There are all sorts of accessories you can use with landscape photography, such as filters, but when you're starting out, the important thing is to learn the art of composition. So don't stress about filters until later on in your photography journey. There are hundreds of different techniques that can be deployed by photographers, but it's important not to stress about those at the start. Space on an SD card is free and you should simply experiment with your camera. Fill up that card with images and then go through the shots looking for the ones that appeal to you and which just work. You will accidentally discover most techniques simply through experimentation, and you can pick up the rest over time as you find out what sort of shots you like taking. You'll hear much talk of things like the bloody rule of thirds, but ignore it all. Just take stuff that looks pleasing to your eye. The only technique to concern yourself with at the beginning is to come to understand the effects that aperture, exposure time and ISO have on your photos. By way of an experiment, take a photograph of a single subject at all the different apertures on your camera. You can do this by putting the camera in aperture priority mode. Then try the same thing with exposure times by putting the camera in exposure priority mode. Finally, see what impact different ISOs have. Learning to use the right aperture, exposure time and ISO is the bedrock of photography and the most important thing you should learn. When you're starting out with landscape photography, the most important thing is to experiment as much as possible. The most convenient way of doing this is by photographing locations in close proximity to your home, because then you can get out and about more often. So visit local beauty spots, local lookouts, local parks and recreation areas. Don't worry about going back repeatedly to the same locations, because you'll find there's always something different to photograph. I've taken over 40,000 photographs in one single location here because it's always changing. As you progress, start creating your own shot list. Every time you're out and about and something catches your eye, add it to your list so that you can return at a later date and photograph it. Photography is a technical hobby, and one of the unfortunate side effects of that is a huge amount of jargon and acronyms. Many of the technical details of photography date back to its earliest days. The ISO setting on cameras, for instance, gets its name from the rating that manufacturers gave to the different films they sold, and the ISO told a photographer how sensitive that film was to light. When the DSLR was invented, the ISO setting was kept, but instead referred to the sensitivity of the camera sensor. The higher the ISO number, the more sensitive to light the sensor becomes. Some technical aspects of photography and its language are always confusing when you're starting out. For instance, aperture numbers seem to work in reverse. The larger the number, the smaller the actual aperture is. This is because they're actually fractions, so f16 means the aperture on the lens is open to a 16th of its full width, and f2 means it's half open and therefore letting in much more light. Don't stress too much about learning all the jargon at the start, and instead pick it all up as you go along. The important part of getting into landscape photography is to simply begin. Start setting some time aside and get out into nature and experiment as much as possible. If you're not confident in your photos, and you don't have to share them, there's no mandatory rule that you're required to upload everything to social media. Maybe somewhere down the line you'll have stuff you are happy to share, but even if you never upload a single image to social media, it's still a fantastic and rewarding hobby. Alrighty guys, that'll do us for this little beginner's guide to landscape photography. Are you just starting out? What's been confusing you as you explore this world? Let me know in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and consider subscribing to my channel for more honest photography and drone related content. Till the next time guys, ta-ta.